When we started mapping out this conference with our partners in the fall, we started talking about technology and innovation as a research theme. It's been a big part of our research project here. But our partner network, and you've heard about our partners earlier from Yolanda and Scott, our partner network said we don't want to just talk about technology, we want to talk about technology and people, and how do we connect the two to create the future. And in a sense what we're talking about is connecting the past and the future, and being connected to future technologies and the future ways of doing things, but connecting to that, building on the past heritage and what makes each community in Eastern Ontario, each rural community, unique in its own right, and finding ways to integrate its heritage, its culture, its people, to create a unique identity, and then use technology and innovation to sell that to the world and connect that to the world. As Norm was talking about it, maybe there's a music festival in the Ozarks, or whatever it is that makes your community unique, finding a way to tap into that and then use technology to simply leverage what makes you unique as a community. And so that's what we've asked our panel to speak to for the next hour, to really make the transition. And this afternoon we're going to be talking about local entrepreneurship and heritage and all these types of things. But we want to think about those in the context of technology. And so we've asked our three panelists to make that transition for us and to talk about what does it mean to build rural economies on people, social capital, human capital, but while leveraging technology and innovation along the way. So our panel, we have three wonderful panelists. We have Craig Desjardins from Prince Edward Lennox Addington Community Futures Development Corporation. As many of you already know, Craig is a real leader in the region and in the community, and has been a real visionary in launching these research partnerships with the Monieson Centre, and so a wonderful partner. We have David Fell, who's the CEO of the Eastern Ontario Regional Network, and also a Queen's MBA grad. So we're very glad to have David here. And Ray Bowman as well. And now over dinner last night, Ray said that his role as an associate at the Rural Development Institute at Brandon University simply equates to dropping by for coffee a few times, but I know he's being he's being humble, indeed very, very humble. As many of you know, Ray, with his rural bulletins from Stats Canada through his long career there, is really in many ways a guru of rural statistics in Canada, and so I'm sure he'll be able to talk to some of the data questions that were asked earlier. So we're pleased to have Craig, Ray, and David join us, and so we hand it over to them.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and good morning, everybody. I'll beg your indulgence. I think we're all going to stay seated when we present. So why is this discussion important? I did a little research. I went on the internet and sort of looked at human capital and technology. In economic terms, human capital is one of the key factors of economic growth. You just have to look at the history of the United States over the last century and see where population and the growth of use of human capital is driving the growth of that economy, and certainly around the world. But for Eastern Ontario and certainly rural communities across Ontario, we're faced with some serious human capital issues. You're looking at out-migration of youth, all of us are facing that, low rates of immigration, aging and retired populations, low birth rates. These are all working against us, and with demographics, that is certainly accelerating. When you tack onto that the role that technology is playing in just about every job now, employment is very much skills biased. And technology and software, although really exciting, at least exciting to me, it's making some workers incredibly more productive, but it's making a lot of other workers less essential. And that's quite a dramatic thing, and you don't have to look very far to see that. I'm going to guess that everybody in this room uses Microsoft Office. Over the last 10 years, there's been about 1 million fewer secretaries employed in North America because of that particular software. I often speak to younger audiences, not that this audience is old in any way, but a stat I saw, there are 64% fewer telephone operators. Now, most of you would remember a telephone operator. A lot of the younger people I speak to don't know what that is. If anybody's booked a trip recently, I'm going to guess you probably booked it on Expedia, etc., whichever travel city. There are 46% fewer travel agents. The list goes on. Bookkeepers, all of them are certainly suffering as the economy transitions. So we have a very complex and changing world. I'm going to focus my comments at least on technology that already exists as opposed to technology that's being developed. So I'm not going to be talking about the very cool stuff that Apple and Google are doing with iWatch or Google Glass. I'm going to be talking about applying technology that is available today. And that really centers around the whole theme of productivity. So how do we increase the efficiency of how we use labor and capital? That's a really important point for government these days because that certainly relates to jobs and prosperity. So you can improve skills, and we're partnering with the University, Queen's University here, and they're all about teaching human capital education and training. And we're adjacent to so many other excellent institutions. Increasing capital investment. I'm involved with the CFDCs, so obviously that's something I'm really interested in. But really, again, the focus of my comments are about investments in the adoption of technology and how that relates to productivity. And David's going to talk a lot about how far we've come and the investments that have been made by government, quite sizable, almost $250 million. Don't want to take your presentation, David, but it's really more than just about making it easier for you to check your Facebook page or to download games. This investment, I'm going to assume that the government made this investment for business development. And really that's what we have to be looking at. It's a challenge of adoption of technology. And I came across some stats in the Globe and Mail the other day, and it suggested that Canadian small business, only 41% had websites. And this is versus 92% of large enterprises. It's pretty hard to take advantage of the global economy if you don't have a website. Interesting fact also in that article, it suggested that 2/3 of the money that Canadians spend online goes to US companies. Well, they can't buy from Canadian companies because only 41% of them have websites, let alone whether they actually have e-commerce. This is really juxtaposed with the fact that Canada has one of the highest internet access and internet usage of any country in the industrialized world. It seems bizarre. From the retail economy, which again, we're all a consumer economy around the world, it's such a critical part of rural employment and rural economies, only 3% of the Canadian economy is online, and that's versus 7% in the US and 23% in the United Kingdom. I had to check that number, it seems so extraordinarily high. So why is this? I'll leave it to some of the academics to look at some of the deeper answers. I see opportunity myself because I'm in business development, but I'm going to touch on some sort of interviews I've had with in conjunction with Yolan Chan and some research we're doing. So I believe the problem for SME, so technology investment is they don't view it as investment. They actually view software and hardware investment as an expense, and they don't see any immediate or relatively immediate return on investment. And without that, they just don't spend the money. They don't have formal strategies that help or employ to actually make that spending make more sense. And that's despite the fact that there's so many applications now, and I love going onto my iPad and having a look and see what comes down every day. There are tens of thousands of free applications that can make a difference for small business. I think there's a term that was coined called digital Darwinism, and I thought it was really clever. It suggested that technology and society are changing faster than people and organizations can adapt. And it seems to me that what a lot of small businesses do is they freeze and then they do nothing. So I think it's incumbent upon anybody involved in business development or economic development to really start to assist small companies to get into the technology strategy and planning business. They need to come up with some sort of strategy. And whether that's focusing on cost, whether it's increasing productivity or expanding markets, or all three, I think it has to be spelled out and it has to be defined. We're working with a lot of small companies, right, encouraging them to look at the variety of technologies. And I had a couple examples. The first one, I carry this little device. I don't know where, probably in the back you can't see this little thing. It's called Square. And I think this is one of the most amazing rural development tools that I've come across in the last 5 years. This allows any person, any small business to do mobile payment. anywhere where they have mobile reception. This is a game changer. 2.75% per swipe. It's free to download. This is an amazing opportunity for our rural communities. We need to, now this is a US-based company. There's lots of other companies getting into this business, including, I'm surprised they took so long to charter banks here in Canada. But this is a dramatic technology that is free. I give these away when I speak. A little closer to home, and quite interestingly, a company called Shopify. Anybody familiar with Shopify? It's an Eastern Ontario company based in Ottawa. They do websites. And basically, they do templated website e-commerce sites. They don't charge upfront development fees. And I'm not suggesting that you don't work with your local web development companies. I'm sure you have great ones in your community. But this company, I think it's the most recent one to be valued over $1 billion. This company has got low upfront costs, templated sites, and back-end process payment and e-commerce. You know, if anything shouted out to me as an opportunity, we need to target, have a website-a-thon where we challenge 1,000 businesses to gain websites and get a discount from Shopify and get these companies in our communities online and selling with e-commerce. Another really great Canadian company is called FreshBooks. Anybody familiar with FreshBooks? FreshBooks is a bookkeeping and accounting service on the cloud. Very inexpensive. Basically what they've done is they've tried to take away paperwork from your business by allowing you to do invoicing, paperwork, bookkeeping, all in the cloud. Get free advice. I think it's $19.95 a month. Again, not that we don't have great bookkeepers in our communities, but these are technologies that aren't being taken advantage of, and I think have great promise. Other changes, I'll keep going down to a few minutes. The rise of the sharing and collaborative economy. One of the speakers alluded to the changes in how we employ people or how we are employed. You know, there's also changes taking in place in how we access markets and customers. Anybody familiar with Airbnb? It's basically a couch rental service. You want to travel somewhere and you want to do it inexpensively, you can go on to Airbnb and you can rent somebody's couch. So everybody here can have their own hotel. Uber is another great example. It's revolutionizing the taxi industry by connecting people who need a ride with people who have a car. Lending Club, something I'm very interested in, is connecting people who want to lend money to people who want to borrow money. And with employment, you have examples like Zendesk, which is basically out-service customer service. So someone in my community could be employed by Zendesk and could be working for a company on the other side of the world. They sign on, they work as many hours as they want, and they sign off. You know, it's really quite extraordinary what is possible now with technologies. And I guess final example would be changes around what, again, the CFTCs do regularly is access to capital. The Ontario Securities Commission recently announced some changes, quite significant changes to regulations surrounding crowdfunding, which is quite exciting. So things like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, the ability to raise funds online among the cloud is quite extraordinary. So I guess I would close with my message that I think we're in the right place at the right time. This is an exciting time for entrepreneurship. It's certainly a very exciting and crowded space with government funding, which is amazing. The federal government just released their Digital Canada 150 strategy, which targets the goal of having Canada be the world-ranking country that adopts digital technologies. So it's a great time to be, I think, in small business and to be in rural. And I would echo many of the comments that were made by many of the speakers ahead of me. And I'll pass it on to David.
That's great. Thank you very much for starting us off, and I think you've highlighted a couple things that I also wanted to talk about. I am going to resort to using a few slides in particular because I think if we're going to talk about human capital, we need to understand who lives out there, and in particular in Eastern Ontario. So I'm not sure how well you can see at the back, but I'll just highlight a couple things in terms of what's a typical resident of rural Eastern Ontario look like. Well, we tend to be slightly older than the average population of Ontario. We have a lower share of income from employment earnings. We tend to be a little bit more dependent on government transfers, and a lower share of the workforce age population with college or university on education. So if we're talking about the human capital that's out in the rural areas in Eastern Ontario, this is a bit of a profile. And I'd really encourage you, if you're interested in getting a sense more of the demographics, there's a whole series of white papers on financial sustainability on the EOWC website. And in terms of some of the challenges that we're going to face, the first two, the demographics and the economics, I think are really well captured in that first slide and in the white papers that go with it. And several people this morning have talked about geography and scale, the challenges of geography and scale. But population density, from our experience, is also a really interesting one. Just to give you a sense of the cost of investment to get broadband out to people. So we went through, for that $170 million, we went through a whole public RFP process to ask the private sector to bid on it. And now that the network is built, our average cost per household pass to deliver that 10 meg down by 1 meg up is somewhere under $500 a household. I can't remember the exact number, it's around 400. But as we've gotten to the last few pieces of our investment model, when we ask the private sector to come in and try and deliver that into the most rural, remote areas, the cost was starting to get up around $10,000 to $15,000 per household passed. So it does give you a sense in those areas where there's less than 3 people per square kilometer. A lot of people have also talked this morning about urban migration, and one of the other things I think that's really interesting is recently there's been a lot of discussion about the jobless recovery. So we have come out of the recession, things are starting to pick up, but we're not creating jobs the way we had in the past. When I started to do some research on this, I found out that actually the jobless recovery is not, probably several of the economists in the room will be aware of this, but the jobless recovery was first coined in 1935, just after the Depression and prior to World War II, so it's not a new phenomenon, and so perhaps we don't need to be quite as scared of it as it's been promoted. But where will the jobs come from? One of my board members is here today, Warren Arsenault, and we've talked a lot about how I think what we need to do is, rather than focusing on recruiting more large businesses, focus on recruiting entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, people with creative capital, people like Cam that was here this morning, and another gentleman I met this morning. His son is an accountant in Toronto and he needs high-speed internet in order to work at the cottage up in the Haliburton area. Those are the kind of folks that are going to create the new jobs within our area. What assets do we have? Again, I think people are well aware of the collaboration, and it's been talked about several times this morning, between a number of different groups. Regional and sub-regional identity, I think, is really important. I attended a presentation about 6 months ago by Ken Coates from the University of Saskatchewan. He's a Canada Research Chair, and he did a very interesting presentation based on his international research on which rural communities succeed and which ones don't. And one of the strongest factors that he identified in terms of which communities will succeed are the ones where people have loyalty to their community, where they want to come back to their community. They might have to go somewhere else to get training, to start a business, but if you can create an identity and a loyalty, then that's really going to help to sustain and bring those entrepreneurs back into the community, or encourage them to stay there in the first place. And again, I don't want to try and summarize the keynote presentation from this morning, but one of the things that I noticed on the website and I thought was really important is the fact that the Intelligent Community Forum, when I first heard about them and got involved with them sort of 4 or 5 years ago, they were really focusing on cities. And now they've broadened that and they're looking at rural areas. And I thought it was really refreshing, especially it may not be comfortable in a room probably half filled with academics, to say that can technology have an impact on human and social capital in rural areas? I think the real answer is maybe. Maybe, depending on how we invest in it and depending on what we do. And I think in some ways we're at a key tipping point moving forward in terms of how we work together and how we collaborate on the strategies to do that. And so I just highlighted in red, we don't know how to do it yet. It's up to us to learn how it can be done. And I thought that that was a really important piece that we still have a lot of work to do to emphasize that. Greg mentioned, and I'm surprised no one else mentioned this morning, but in terms of looking at technology and human capital, I think it was April the 4th, Canada released its digital strategy called Digital Canada 150. It's been 4 or 5 years in the making. We've been waiting for this. I'm not going to comment on positively or negatively on it, but I did want to say that the federal government does have a strategy, and if you look at their goals in the strategy, which I've highlighted here, their goal is to get 98% of Canadians access to internet at 5 megs per second. So that's our national strategy, and they're willing to, or planning to, invest $305 million to get 280,000 Canadians. If you went backwards and took some of the math from the investment that I talked about in the cost per household pass previously and applied it to this, you could get a rough sense of the cost of per household pass and what their plans are and how far that investment is going to get them. One of the reasons I put this up is because I think it's, again, regardless of whether you positively or negatively view this strategy, I think one of the things we need to do to follow up on this conference today is to continue to work together to apply for some of the other pieces we have built out access in Eastern Ontario. My colleagues this morning earlier talked about the UR network, and now we need to leverage some of these other pieces that are available on here. So I did want to just mention our project again. Lisa and Laura talked significantly about it. I think the important piece is that over 85% of the people can now get a terrestrial 10 meg solution, and 99% of the people can get that 10 by 1 satellite access. And unlike what Cam was saying this morning, when it costs $300 a month and the huge upfront investment, to get 10 meg download, 1 meg upload on satellite, it's now about $89 a month. So that really evens out the playing field for people in rural Eastern Ontario. And the one piece that I wanted to talk a little bit more about is phase 2 and where we're going. We've now built the infrastructure for the project, the broadband infrastructure, and the Warden's Caucus is working with a number of other partners to do exactly what you were talking about, is developing a strategy for how to get people to utilize this network. So a couple of examples. We've already released just last week RFP to develop a cell gap analysis. We've concentrated on fixed broadband previously, but there are huge gaps in mobile broadband, and a lot of the technology that we're talking about requires mobile broadband. None of the mobile broadband providers bid on any of our original RFPs. So they, at the time, they had different focus, different level of interest. We're hoping they'll come to the table moving forward and that we can build a business case to invest in that piece of it. Other examples include home healthcare monitoring projects. We're looking at trying to work with the provincial government and the federal government to bring home healthcare monitoring into rural areas in Eastern Ontario. And just to build, Craig and I were talking at the beginning, it's not just the private sector and small, medium-sized businesses that need to work on learning how to utilize the access to broadband. One of the key focuses for our phase 2 is getting the municipalities from the Warden's Caucus to actually start working together on shared services, shared IT services, and developing IT strategies. And there's a real interest and enthusiasm. The Warden's Caucus invested $10 million into the broadband project. Now they need to get apps online to get people participating in the budgeting process, collaborating together, getting municipal services online, and that's a big focus of what we're planning to do. So those are some of the things that we're just in the midst of developing now to encourage people to utilize the network. And in terms of discussion questions, part of my focus is really what role does government have to play in this? We've built this network using a private-public partnership model. I think it's been effective, but I think going forward there are a lot of different business models that could be utilized as well. So thank you very much. And I'll pass it over.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation to come and participate. Jeff sent me a whole bunch of questions that I might address. I didn't know anything about any of those things, so I decided to have an outline of my own here. So, how do I do this? I have to button put it right. Yes. Okay. So I have an outline of 5 or 6 items I'll address here. And as Jeff said, I used to work for Numbers Canada, and typically I put up numbers and charts and everything. And this time I decided to go without a number and without a chart. And I should find out what the back door is. That might not have been a good idea. But the first thing I want to talk about is a potential labor shortage. And hidden in this slide set is the graph The point is that starting at about 2015, everywhere in Canada, almost everywhere in Canada, there will be fewer people entering the age group that will be in the workforce compared to the number of people leaving the workforce. Therefore, there's a potential job shortage. The only way to save that is for old people like me to keep on working, and therefore, if somebody comes into the workforce and the old people keep working, there will not be a job shortage. This one. So there's the point in 2015, a potential job shortage, or potential labor market shortage, and to quote Red Green, we're all in this together. I'm pulling for you. I mean, everybody will be in this together. There's one exception, Nunavut. And so here's an opportunity. If you're a small town in rural Ontario, it seems to me there'd be some mothers in Nunavut that would come and live in your community if they could bring their kids, and their kids could go to school in your community. And your objective is obviously to find a job for the mother, and within 4 or 5 years, the student will be old enough to look around for a job, and therefore you could build a job stream and people flowing into your community that would be interested in staying in your community and taking on jobs. In Canada, there will be 0.8 people coming into the workforce for every 1 person leaving. In Nunavut, there are 4 people coming into the workforce for every 1 person leaving. I think you can grow the labor market in your town if you start by inviting people from Nunavut to come in, have a Nunavut community in your community, and given rural community social capital, I think it's a winning solution. And don't ask me to try to do it, of course. One of my charts is looking at employment trends in Eastern Ontario. The point is that generally in Canada, there's a job loss in the recession of 2009. All those jobs have come back. But what has not happened is the percent of people employed has not come back. I forget the different numbers between the different economic regions, and you may know the numbers around here, but a 5 percentage point drop in recession of the number of people percent of people with jobs, and that is very, very flat going out since 2009. About the same percent are working now as right after the recession. The numbers are going up, but because the population's going up, the percent working is not going up. It's going to take a long time to recover from that recession in terms of getting your percent employment up. A couple of notes on technology in rural Canada. The first thing is some arithmetic. I should watch this slide. The first observation is in the left box. The value of economic production in the country is also called the value added by GDP economists or national accounts people. It's also the gross domestic product. It's the same concept. Value of economic production or value added or gross domestic product. And that is equal to the value of everything you sell minus the intermediate goods. So it's the return to labor and capital. So if you have a tomato greenhouse, you buy intermediate goods like seed, and maybe even buy water, you certainly buy electricity, and you buy glass for the greenhouse, well, that's capital. You buy fertilizer and so on. Those intermediate goods, you buy those goods, and you sell your tomatoes. The value added to those intermediate goods by capital and labor is your GDP, or your value added. So GDP is return to capital plus the return to labor. So GDP per worker, GDP divided by L, is basically driven by capital divided by L, capital per worker. So GDP per worker is your labor productivity, and that's fairly obviously driven by the amount of machinery and equipment each worker has. And the point here is that technology almost always arrives as a capital investment. First implication is, well, more technology will improve your worker productivity, and it arrives as a capital investment. The point is, one point is, do not tax capital, because the more capital a worker has, the higher the productivity and the higher the wage could be. You want to tax the capitalist, I would argue, but you do not want to tax the capital. It's a very important distinction from my sociology friends, or those that are still my friends. And the other important observation is you bring in new technology, we've been hearing it all day, there will be winners and there will be losers. Another observation on technology in rural Canada, looking at distance reducing technologies, a distance reducing technology is a technology that reduces the price of distance. So it might be the cost of transportation, but it might be the social cost of being away from your mother or too close to your mother, depending on your relationship with your mother, and the psychological cost of being away from loved ones and so on. So price is an economic, social, or psychological. I don't know if you recall rural retail before the post office, before my time, but there was rural retail before somebody invented the post office. Along came a distance reducing technology called the postal system, and then Timothy Eaton could sell things into your community and extract money from your community and put some of your retailers out of business. But many local consumers were much happier. And what's now putting Canada Post out of business? The internet. But it's the internet that's saving the rural post office, because we're buying things over the mail, it's being shipped in through the mail, and the rural mail people in rural Saskatchewan, I know, are very happy with internet shopping because they have a full-time job delivering parcels. So the internet is putting Canada Post out of business in one sense, the internet is saving rural postal delivery in another sense. Okay, looking at rural retail with dirt roads, every Main Street business wanted a gravel road into town, and then of course every Main Street business wanted a paved road into their town, and then every Main Street business discovered that people would drive from their town to the regional centre to shop. Not everybody would drive in on the paved road, more people would drive out. So there's winners and losers. Now you can actually sell things from your town that people would drive the paved road to get there, but your town might lose more. So the winners and losers, but the local consumers were happier. You mentioned rural travel agents. I don't know how many times I've gone to a rural travel agent 10 years ago, or how many times in the last 10 years, but they provided a fantastic service, and then came the internet, and every rural traveler can now make his or her bookings. It takes some time, but at least we have the option of doing it. Most Main Street travel agents are out of business, and local consumers are happier. So what am I saying here? Well, I think there are two themes. With each new technology, there are winners and losers, and many local consumers are happier. What happened to the promise of telework? And there's still promise. The guest speaker this morning was saying there's still great promise here. And we need to discuss it more, or maybe it's getting there, but I'm not going to be around when it gets there. So the point was we could work anywhere and live where we wanted. And then the question is, how many people would want to live in Tamworth? I've never think I've been. I've probably been close to Tamworth, never been in Tamworth. But I have teleworked from a remote location. I teleworked from a postal code that was SOL, oh no. And so you had a conversation about the middle of nowhere. That's the closest definition of the middle of nowhere I can think of. But only people who wanted to live there were living there. And they liked being where it was quiet. And no busy, no pizza delivery, nothing like that. So people really like being in the middle of nowhere. They should be allowed to do it and call it that. But anyway, that aside here. But it took two spouses to want to do this. And not often you can find two spouses who would agree to be in the same place, let alone SOL, oh no. So my telework experience, I worked for Statistics Canada, but I was teleworking. The good news of teleworking was there are no meetings. 5, 10, 15, 20 high school students into your town from China to learn English, learn Canadian culture, whatever, and that could help your high school and your students will learn Chinese. These Chinese people from China will learn English, be fantastic networks back and forth, and an opportunity to grow your community over time. The general idea is find a service to export. It's going to be a bit hard to find a good to export. Thank you.
Thanks for those thought-provoking opening comments from our panelists. We want to turn it to you and allow you to engage in the dialogue to talk about what's the future of rural communities and how do we build our futures on technology and people. So thoughts or questions for the panel? Jen.
I believe one of the points that has been brought out by this panel and the previous panel as well is that we need to start from the ground up in terms of ensuring that our young people, that our youth, our students, our early years people are supported and are educated about the values of living in a rural community and the benefits, and that there are options over and above the urban settings. So I wondered, just in the room, how many people is there anyone here from the Limestone School Board or the Algonquin School Board? Are there educators here who are out there in the field? You know, what are they doing to educate and bring that mindset to our rural communities? Because I know that in many rural communities, they are still not that distant from urban settings, and a number of the teachers live in the city and come out to the rural communities. They're not actually part of the flavor of the communities, and I think that makes a difference. So just a question for the audience. How many people here are educators, and how do we engage them and help them have an understanding of where we need to go?
Not sure if there are educators in Campbell. Do you want to comment on that?
Hi, I'm not an educator, but I just wanted to grab the microphone. No, seriously, we worked on a application to the Intelligent Community Forum to have the City of Kingston recognized as a top 7 community, and we're fortunate enough that that's the case. And what we did is we interviewed a lot of different folks and different organizations that included the Limestone School Board. And one person in particular was Wendy Parliament, who was a teacher at the Enterprise Public School. And so what Wendy did a number of years ago out of her own pocket, she bought computers for the students so that they could use them in the classroom and not have to just go to the lab. And what happened with that is, instead of just using it as a lab exercise, the computers got integrated into all of their daily work. That was such a success that she then, out of her own pocket, bought them tablets, and they started using those. And I happened to come along when she had the tablets and the laptops, and I've never seen a classroom of about 30 kids working so hard on various projects, all using the technology. And part of the reason it happened is because the municipality, through the utility that I work with, built a 10 megabit internet connection into that school, and otherwise they wouldn't have been able to connect it and use it. And it was so successful that they started bringing teachers from the board through to see how she was doing it. And then ultimately they turned it into a pilot project. She got her money reimbursed to her for all that risk that she'd taken. And the school board is since rolling that out, not just in rural schools, but in urban, because her students would graduate from grade 8 and they would go down to Ernestown Secondary School. And guess what? They didn't have access to all the great technology and tools and applications that they did in Wendy Parliament's class. So I think messages, I think the rural people are actually, in some cases, ahead of the urban.
A comment over here.
I thought I would just speak a bit to the telework. I don't know whether you meant particularly working for an organization and then rather than working at IBM's head office, you're working somewhere else. But I live in one of those places that we've talked about, that, sorry Diane, the middle of nowhere. And I moved from Kingston to that place and have met many other people who have moved from big cities elsewhere. And one of them, who is a graphic artist, told me that she was working on the internet. So she got her business on the internet. And through a company called Elance, which provides freelance work for all different kinds of industries. And so I ended up getting several jobs on Elance. One of them was as the executive administrator for the American Association of Accredited Naturopathic Medical Colleges in Washington, D.C., and then subsequently that led to a job with the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians, and I've done all kinds of things on the internet, which I don't do anymore, but there is a lot of opportunity to work from home anywhere that you have internet access. And we did have meetings every week, by the way. So there's lots of opportunities. I mean, the American naturopathic physicians met every week, and they were from all over the United States. And we all met on the telephone. So there's lots of opportunity to do work of many, many different ilks through the internet.
Just wondering if the panel might want to respond to that.
Maybe just a comment, and I think what's important is your attitude, and the attitudes need to change. I showed a technology called 99design.ca. It's a web platform for to get logos and designs done. And basically, it's a global marketplace of about 260,000 graphic designers who will, for a set fee, will design your logo. So you put some ideas of what you want, and then everybody puts in an idea, and then you pick the ones that you like. And I was telling this to a graphic designer, and they said, "I can't believe that you're supporting spending money outside of the community." I said, "No, what I've just told you is that you now have access to a global marketplace, and you can do it right from beautiful Prince Edward County." The company that I want to experiment with this, so I helped this company experiment with this 99 Design. And the winning design was from Argentina. That's where the designer was. So the pink lunch pail in beautiful Milford, Ontario, has a logo designed by somebody in Argentina. But that doesn't mean that there isn't opportunities for all the graphic designers in Prince Edward County to access businesses all over the world. It's the attitude and being global. I think that's important.
I agree. For contract work, teleworking is fantastic. Being inside a big organization, I think, is a different story. And back to the question about the young people, in your town, how many students in grade 9, grade 10 know the different types of jobs in this town? How many is running, do they know there's actually a little manufacturing plant back there with 3 people in it, of which one person has a Bachelor of Science or whatever? Do they know the type of jobs that are here? So I would encourage you to figure that out and educate the young students in your town about the types of jobs in this town.
Just quickly, Jeff. So we have 12 staff, and we eat our own cooking. We all work from home in the sense of teleworking, and our administrative overhead for the project, which I would, is less than 3% of the entire project. So is it possible? Absolutely. We have staff in Kingston, Prescott, several of them are here today. Little rural areas outside of Kingston, Peterborough. I think it's definitely possible. And it helps to reduce some of those overhead costs.
Thanks very much, Nelson.
In 2012, an associate and I did a couple of research reports on labor markets and training needs in rural Eastern Ontario regions, and both of the reports were to funding agencies that decided to keep the reports confidential for complicated reasons. But I can talk a little bit about some of our findings. One is in the rural communities where we did focus groups and talked to employers about youth retention, youth attraction, the problem was not the availability of jobs. In fact, in one small town, the company had to set up a branch office in Waterloo to staff it with people that had the skills they needed, because they had job vacancies that they couldn't fill in their small town. And the obstacle was that for people under 35, they would move to the small town because of the lack of social opportunities, not because of the lack of employment opportunities. And in contrast, when we talk to people in municipal offices and economic development offices, they were all saying, "Oh, we got to have more jobs for our young people, more jobs for our young people are all leaving." And meanwhile, the employers were saying, we got job vacancies, we can't get people to come here. Age 35 seemed to be the turnaround point. If people were married and they were age 35, and contrary to what Ray said, like if two people agreeing, if one person had a connection to the community, either through family or summer vacation, summer camp or something, then they would move to the small town and fill those job vacancies. But up till 35, they wouldn't because of the lack of social opportunities. Second thing that we found was a big trend that's been mentioned several times here in people like Ray and myself, self-employed professional scientific and technical services are working from home in rural small town areas, but really suffering from a lack of infrastructure to support that. Every once in a while we need a video conference facility, every once in a while we need tech support, every once in a while we need secretary, every once in a while we need color photocopies, professionally bound and designed, but none of us can afford to do that on any kind of a regular basis. But collectively, there are business opportunities all over Eastern Ontario. We saw it. One region we looked at had a total population of 120-some thousand. The other region we looked at had 90,000 people. Encompassing areas that didn't have a single town over 12,000 people. So there's opportunities there for the infrastructure that would support these work-at-home professional scientific and technical services. And I think the whole youth out migration thing has been, a lot of the initiatives have really been misdirected in trying to solve problems that don't really exist. Anyway, that's based on two small studies, but I think supported by a lot of the conversations that have come out today.
Any comments there on social infrastructure and addressing youth migration?
Perhaps just a brief comment. We've been working really hard in the ICT space to try and attract technology companies to rural Prince Edward County. We've had success, and it was great. I think there's 12 or 13 businesses there with 47 employees or something. And what we forgot about is that while my job is business development, the private sector people we're working with are venture capital angel investors, is that we just want them to work. But 27-year-olds, they want to do something other than work. And so we've actually had to develop sort of social programs. So, we have like nerd night at one of the bars every third Thursday, and we organized a taekwondo for some of them that want to do. So it's funny, it sort of struck us initially as babysitting, but without that interactivity, all those nerds kind of get a little unbalanced. So you got to throw in some fun in there for them every once in a while.
Just to agree with Nelson, I can point people to a study where why did youth leave? Jobs, education, fun. But that's not why they came back. They didn't come back until they wanted to settle down, maybe 35. They came back for family and community.
Wilson and Bob.
I just want to take a different angle on this because I know we're talking about technological development for rural areas and sort of how to tackle youth migration coming into the cities. Was that how reliant is actual rural communities on the international global market that we're seeing today? Especially from our first presentation, we saw that yes, we are seeing urbanization. People are moving out to the cities, but we're also at the same time seeing that cities are more being reliant on consumption and entertainment and that sort of thing. So. The reliance of the rural community on the international global market can be something of a good thing and a bad thing. And just to provide an example is that I think we will reach maybe a tipping point in terms of cities being overpopulated and those sorts of things. I'm not sure if you've heard of, this is going way out there in terms of, 30, 40 years, is the development of the Hyperloop. I'm not sure if anybody heard of that, is the train system being developed by Elon Musk. He's the CEO for Tesla and SpaceX. He was talking about a magnetic train system where, you don't really have to live in an urban city to work in an urban area. So say, like me, his idea was, say, traveling from New York to California in 1 hour. So another example would be like people living in Kingston or a rural area traveling from here to, say, Florida to work. They zip in 1 hour, go to Florida, work, come back. And so I was thinking, how this might seem like radical, something that's crazy, but, this can be a potential future sort of way of trying to tackle how the rural activities is, how to tackle youth out migration and that sort of thing. So it really goes back to the reliance of global markets. So if you have this sort of technology where you have, magnetic transportation systems where, we go to a different country to work every day, and, that takes you about an hour wherever you work. Say from Kingston, you go to California, 1 hour trip, come back and work here. You have more people living in rural areas, and you don't have this sort of thing called urban. Oh, we still have that, but so I just wondered if you can comment on the sort of the reliance on a global market and how it's a good thing or a bad thing for rural areas for technological development.
Yeah, maybe I'll take a crack at that. I think one of the challenges and one of the things you're going to see from ICFTC and many of the CFTCs and federal programs is a renewed focus on product and market development as a key priority. I think in sort of the work I do with businesses, Canadian companies don't tend to produce a lot of products, and we sell it to ourselves, and that's a huge shortcoming. It's part of it's not, I don't make the government strategy, but I do see that in the media they're out negotiating. There's 27 world trade negotiations going right now. They've just signed with South Korea, the EU. The government wants Canadian firms to make more products and sell them to new customers. And I think for us to survive, I think that's got to be a key strategy.
And on your point, yeah, the world will get more globalized as the price of transportation goes down. But I still only want to live if Craig is opening up a nerdy bar.
And I'll just tie together a couple of the previous comments and about clustering. Sometimes not being near a cluster is a distinct advantage. So in a previous life, before I started this, we started a software company in Peterborough, which is reasonably rural, in 2002, right after the dot-com collapse. It was a bad time, but we had about 4 employees and we grew to about 60 staff over time, signed reseller agreements with HP in Canada and the US, Brazilian reseller agreements, Australia. We found it to be a distinct advantage not to be in Toronto, Kitchener-Waterloo, or Ottawa. Our wage rates were about 30% lower than those other areas. Our rental space was significantly lower, but at the time, the biggest barrier for us to growing was access to, we had a e-learning application. We were trying to host people from all over the world. We were paying about $1,500 for a 1.5 meg T1 line. That was in 2002. That's pretty expensive compared to what you can get it for now. And just the one other comment about the social piece, I always wondered why one of my business partners owned 2 of the bars in town. And really it was because that's where all the staff went and hang out after work.
Very good. Bob, and then we might have time.
I can answer a couple of questions with regards to the youth and being a professor in the business program at Loyalist, as well as linked to some of the things we talked about economically. Over the last 11 years, I've run a program called the Alliance Excellence Achievement Program. It was part of my research for my master's degree in adult education, in which I have teams of students who work on community-based projects. Everything from profit, not-for-profit, small entrepreneur to large corporation, government, retail service, you name it. And the students want to be engaged. The students want to participate. And I was told this last night by one of my keeners. When I graduate, I want to live in Belleville. I want to live in this community. I want to be given the opportunity. That's what everybody's looking for, Bob. What you're doing is what we need. So please understand, one of the biggest challenges we have is I'm just working at the college level, but we're trying to link down to the primary and the secondary school students because, no, they don't know what jobs. They don't have any understanding. Business? 11 years ago, I did a study across the whole Prince Edward Hastings County schools, grade 10, and grade 7. Almost the exact same answers were at both levels. What is business? What did they say? Banks and numbers. 90% of the students, they have no idea what business is, what innovation, creativity, the types of things. So it's critical that we integrate them to what we're talking about here, and that we involve boards, and we involve students, and we involve communities, profits and not-for-profits, in this whole technological revolution that's required. It's essential, because without the kids, none of this, what we're talking about, sorry, I don't care how good we all are in this room, if we don't engage the youth, it will go nowhere. So we must engage, and we must get them to participate, we must get them to take ownership for this. And that's what my primary focus is. And someone who does this very well from a community point of view, and I'm trying to get an understanding how he does it, is Craig. I'm not sure how he gets so much approval as he does, but I would love to try and put together a collaborative group that works on doing what Craig does at the CFDC level, at the education level, and put together a group that really focuses on trying to engage primary and secondary school kids in rural business. And I would love to be part of that.
Thank you, Bob. I think we have time. Maybe just there's one comment at the back. I think was there? There was.
Just to go back a little bit to this business of cultural attractions, if you want to call them that attract businesses to come to some of these rural communities. This is becoming quite popular now. Napanee is engaged on something they call creating a cultural strategy. And they've hired a consultant and they've been at this for 6 months, Craig. And they're saying, I mean, it's pretty simple stuff. They try and list locally what the cultural attractions are, and then they ask people to rate which are the most important cultural attractions. They talk about the sports teams, the historical buildings, access to swimming pools, all that sort of thing. And as the mayor said, you know, we've been spending money on economic development for a long time. It's time we started spending money on cultural development, or this thing is going to stall. And I think he's right, and I think that's a coming trend. It's not just happening.
Well, I'll ask the panel, any closing comments then?
Just thanks for coming today, and we look forward to working with all of the organizations in the room on phase 2 and applying some of the research in the rural areas in Eastern Ontario.
I guess my closing comment is the role of these kind of gatherings and the collaboration between university and community is vitally important, and it couldn't be done without our friend. I know we have some people here from SHIRK. Somebody waved their hand. This kind of progress that we're making in Eastern Ontario with evidence-based research is resulting in increased prosperity, and that's an incredible thing. So we need to keep this thing rolling.
That's the last word. So let's thank our panelists. And as a gift to each of our speakers today, we've been giving them copies of our book, which we're very proud to release this year, Revitalizing Rural Economies. I know my name's on the cover, but I don't take much credit for it. It's really a product of Yolande's leadership, and Christine Duclos here. I think she's at the back somewhere, but Christine worked endless hours editing it and pulling it together. And really, it's a product. If you read the acknowledgments, you'll see it's the product of the work of many students who are involved in following up on stories we heard about in your communities as we were running discovery workshops, pulling out success stories and responding to challenges we heard through the workshop process, and challenges like youth out-migration, youth engagement, all entrepreneurship, all these things we've been talking about. So we tried to put it together as a tool for you, and there are many of your stories in the book. So we hope it's a benefit to you. It is available today at a special conference rate. If you didn't order it in advance, McGill Queen's Press has made a special discount available, and there's an order form you can take home with you, or you can buy it at the table there. But anyways, thanks again to our panelists.